Okay. All right. So thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Beth Blanchette. I'm an engagement coordinator and policy analyst with the M&A and the Environment and Climate Change Department. I myself am a citizen of the M&A. My Métis side of the family is from Vimy, just north of Edmonton, which would be District 11 under the new Otipemisiwak government constitution. I grew up and still live in Edmonton, or Amiskwaciwâskahikan, and I'm just so privileged to live here in a place that's really intertwined with Métis history and is also a traditional gathering place of many nations, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, and Anishinaabe. Just quickly about me, I studied ecology at the U of A and worked in environmental policy before joining the M&A last August. And since I was very little, I've loved nature and all of its little critters, even the weird, creepy, crawly ones, and definitely loved bees. Since then, as I've grown up, I've really been on a lifelong journey of learning how to become a better steward for the environment and all those critters that I love so much. And I have a feeling I'm not the only person who's on that journey of learning to be a steward. There's a lot of people on this call, and I bet some of you are on that too. And yeah, I'm so excited to see you here today. This is our Speaker Spotlight series. Here we feature Métis community members and industry professionals who share their skills and knowledge. And this includes featuring initiatives within the M&A related to sustainability, environmental stewardship, and climate action. Today, our spotlight will be on Tiffany Harrison, my coworker, and definitely like the best person to talk about our native bee conservation program here at the M&A. Also in the call are my colleagues, Ali and Jen. I'm just gonna let them quickly introduce themselves. Ali, do you wanna start us off?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. This is usually my webinar that I host, but I'm very happy to have Beth hosting tonight. So my name is Ali Greenslade. I have the same role as Beth at the M&A. I'm also an engagement coordinator and policy analyst. I myself am not Métis. I've grown up in Edmonton and spent lots of time out at Pigeon Lake, where I developed a big love of nature and all the wild things, which was close to Samson, Ermiskin, and Montana Cree Nations. Very honored to work at the Métis Nation of Alberta, where I have for about the last year and a half. So thanks again for everyone for being here. I can't believe this is our 10th Speaker Spotlight session. I'll pass it over to Jen.
Hi, everyone. It's really nice to see so many people come in, so many people be excited about bees. My name is Jen Pelopiu. I am an M&A citizen as well. I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, so I live in Edmonton now, but originally from a bit south, and I'm the policy and engagement manager. So Beth and Ali are a couple of my team members, and then we work with Tiffany in our department as a whole. So really excited to have everyone here. This is really close to my heart because a couple of years ago, this bee conservation program, me and a coworker launched this together. So for the past 2 years, I ran this program, and then now I've passed it along to Tiffany, who is our bee expert and is just bringing so much more to it, which is incredible. So thank you guys all for coming and for being excited about bees. It's been cool to see this program grow and see the interest grow within the Métis community. Back to you, Beth.
Yeah, thank you guys. Definitely a dream team. Yeah, I'm so excited everyone's here tonight. This series, one of the goals is to provide a sense of community for Métis people, as well as providing information on climate change, climate action, and the protection of the environment. And just for your interest, the choice of topic for each spotlight is based on citizen feedback from previous events and surveys. So if you're ever wondering why we choose what we choose, it's based on the feedback you give us. Every time you fill out a survey or a poll for one of our engagement events, we're taking that into account and we're looking at what citizens want to learn about next. Okay, we're now going to open the session officially with a prayer that was provided by Elder Norma Spicer. I'm not sure if she's in the session today, but I've no doubt that she will be watching it in the future if she can't make it tonight. Her prayer has been tailored tonight to fit the content of our engagement. And yes, I'm so happy we get to open in a good way.
Welcome to the Otimpimsewak Métis Government Environment Series on wild bees. There are over 300 species of native bees in Alberta. Winters can be hard on these bees. Many of them die. Those that survive are finding it difficult to compete against the honeybees, who are fed not only by their keepers, but from the natural flowers found in the wild. As a Métis people, we must continue to play a crucial role in the protection of our native bee population, for they are an indispensable part of our natural world and biodiversity. It is with environment series such as this one today that encourages us to be good stewards of our environment, to safeguard our native bees so that we can continue to enjoy the beauty and health benefits of the plants they pollinate. Please join me in prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the beauty of creation and its rich and varied fruits, and forgive us for the times we have taken the earth's resources for granted. Transform our hearts and minds so that we would learn to care for and share the bounty of your creation. Teach us to touch the earth with gentleness, love, and respect for all things. We are grateful to the Otimpimsewak government for their environment series and resources that bring us interesting speakers who share their wisdom and information on how to be good stewards of our environment. We acknowledge that wild bees are a part of that abundant life the Creator has given us. They are essential in pollinizing flowers, plants, and our gardens. Dear Lord, may you, in your good caring for our sustenance, bless the wild bees and their natural habitat, greatly increase their numbers, and preserve them, that they may fill us with the richness of their gifts that sustain us. We thank you for giving us so much to be grateful for, especially for every season of our bountiful harvest, and the life you so lovingly instill in the biodiversity of this wondrous world you have left in our keeping. We ask for your blessings, wisdom, and guidance as we listen and participate in this program today about the wild bees of Alberta. Let us place our trust in you now and forever. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
All right, thank you so much, Elder Norma. We just so much appreciate your beautiful words and your continuous support of the Speaker Spotlight series. All right, moving on. I'm just going to give you a very brief, don't worry, update of our department. For anyone who is unfamiliar with the Speaker Spotlight, hasn't attended before, the M&A ECC department stands for the Métis Nation of Alberta Environment and Climate Change Department. We do a lot of different work in the areas of conservation, environmental monitoring, renewable energy, and how the Métis Nation can become more resilient to climate change impacts as a whole. As well as our bee kits, you may know us from the plant walks we host across the province or for building a solar farm at Métis Crossing. And all the work we do is rooted in M&A citizen feedback. Like I said before, anytime you interact with us, submit a survey, talk to us at a booth, at an event, we're taking that input really seriously and thinking about how we can make our programs better. So one example of this is our ECC initiative. ECC means Earth in Cree. It's the name of our community monitoring program. The different programs in ECC, like berry monitoring and this native bee conservation program, were driven by what citizens have said they want to see in environmental monitoring. There's also a committee of citizens to advise and direct the focus of ECC, and M&A citizens can directly contribute by submitting forms like our berry monitoring or fish health forms and are directly involved in citizen science. So I'm not going to talk about all the branches on this tree because that would take all night. That's not what you're here for. But if you are curious about more of the work we do, feel free to reach out to us. You can email us, or you can actually watch our Meet the ECC Team Speaker Spotlight on the M&A YouTube channel. And one of the best ways to stay informed and participate is to follow the M&A's bi-weekly newsletter. We'll put the link to that in the chat. Okay, and a couple updates of things that you might be interested in getting involved in. This Saturday, February 10th, is our Ski Winter Guardians gathering. So this is an open event for Métis citizens and their families. You can drop in between 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. It's at Lesser Slave Lake, meeting at the Widewater Community Complex. There's going to be ice fishing out on the lake where you can learn from harvesters. Oh, I see someone's going in the chat. That's great. I'll see you there. You can learn to, ice fish from experienced Métis harvesters and then warm up in the community hall with some hot chocolate, some bannock, some games. We're excited to see you. And we'll put the link to the event in the chat so you can register. We're running out of registration spots, so you might want to get on that quick if you really want to come. Okay, and one more thing, also opening this Saturday is our spring bee kit giveaway. We started this last year where citizens could apply to get a bee kit. Tiffany is going to talk later about what's in the bee kit, so I'm not going to tell you right just yet. But yes, on February 10th, applications open. They close February 16th, so get in there while you can. And at the end of the session, we're actually going to have a survey. And if you fill it out, if you have a M&A citizen ID, and we ask if you haven't received a bee kit already last year, because I know a lot of people have, you can be entered into a draw to win one of 5 bee boxes for the end of tonight for just people in the session. This is a great leg up because we had way more applications last year than kits to give away. So it gives you an extra chance of getting a bee kit. Although we're really hoping to get them out to everyone, as many people as possible. All right. So we're gonna switch gears now. I'm done with all the department stuff. We're now onto the main part of the presentation. And just before I pass things off to Tiffany, I want to talk about why we are connected to native bees, why we're talking about them tonight here at the M&A. Métis people have a long history and relationship with the land, and that couldn't be more true than our relationship with plants and the animals that pollinate them. Native bees pollinate native plants, which in turn are our food, our medicines. They're also food for our other animal friends. And some examples, I've included some pictures of bees on plants you might recognize. There's the Lindley's aster, the little purple flower. There's the wild rose, the pink flower, and there's a chokecherry with all the little white flowers. And maybe you pick chokecherries or you make rosehip tea so you understand how important these plants are. And even more so than sustenance, the beauty of flowers also inspires Métis beadwork. And in fact, some First Nations refer to Métis people historically as the flower beadwork people. It's just so ingrained in our culture and so important. So I think you can see how flowers are just such an important part, or plants are an important part of our lives, and hence bees are also connected to us. And as Elder Norma said, Métis people play a crucial role in our local ecosystem. We have a long history of being stewards of our environment. And I do not think it's a coincidence that we had so many citizens apply for bee kits this year, and we have so many people in the session. I think it's in our DNA to learn more about the environment and our part in it and how to be good stewards of it. And so this is why the M&A started the Native Bee Conservation Program, and why I'm so excited for you to learn more about it from my colleague, Tiffany. I'm going to pass things off to her. She is a conservation coordinator on our team who helps with the IPCA initiative, that is the Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas, as well as leading our native bee conservation program. So take it away, Tiffany.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. That was a beautiful prayer at the beginning. So hi, everybody. My name's Tiffany Harrison. I'm very happy to be here with you guys, and thank you so much for being here tonight. I grew up in Treaty 19 territory in Ontario, and although I'm not Indigenous, I am very, very honored to share all my experiences and knowledge about bees and connect with you about bees today. So I did grow up in Ontario. I very recently moved to Alberta to be part of the M&A, and although I've actually worked out in Alberta in the past, working with bees, it's actually one of the reasons I fell in love with Alberta. So it's kind of funny that I'm out here living here now. So I grew up in the city, but anytime I could be outside and following bugs around and interacting with nature and wildlife, I always wanted to be a part of that where I could. I was also kind of labeled always the tree hugger of my group, ironically. And it's actually quite funny. I kind of fell into my passion for insects and bees just throughout time and slowly. I, as a teenager, was super interested in photography and really close-up photography. And I found myself going around chasing insects and thought it was really cool to see photos of such small things really blown up, and would show my friends and think how cute they were and such. So I liked bringing light to such small creatures that were really passed by day to day. Later, I found myself in school studying things all kind of environmental, so biology and ecology, and really knew that was my passion in life. How I came to really fall into work with bees kind of just happened and fell into my lap. I worked with a nonprofit species at risk organization for about 6 years called Wildlife Preservation Canada in their bumblebee recovery program. So I did a lot of cool bumblebee conservation work, whether that was field work or education. So that kind of led into my specialty in bumblebees. So we're going to talk a lot about other bees, different kinds of bees today. But bumblebees is what I know the most about. I will do my best to answer questions regarding other bees, but that is kind of the group of bees that I am most familiar with. As Beth mentioned, I'm a conservation coordinator at the M&A now, so I only started late June, so I still feel a little bit new to the program, but I've been very warm welcomed, and again, really happy to be here with you guys. So just some fun videos I'm going to show you. So some of the work that I enjoyed the most working in that bumblebee recovery program was our field work. So in the spring, I got to do some really fun monitoring activities where all across Ontario primarily, but I did work a little bit in Alberta, as I mentioned. I'd visit all kinds of sites. So this could be provincial parks, national parks, city parks, roadsides, anywhere really that bees or flowers could be, which is in quite a lot of places, actually. And I would go and catch as many bumblebees as I could find, see what species were there, how many. And I got to do that for about 2 months straight. So I got to run around and frolic through flowers, and it was absolutely wonderful. So I'll show you some fun videos. We got these really cool long extension nets to catch bees. So they look quite ridiculous, especially when you're about 5'2" like me. These nets extend about 3 times my height. So in the top right here is just one of the videos I love showing people. And not that I'm encouraging you to go out and hold bees by any chance, but just goes to show you that bees are actually quite docile. I meet a lot of people who are actually a little scared of bees, worried about being stung, and that is totally natural and valid. But I've worked with a lot of bees over time, and they really are such docile, beautiful creatures. On the left here is me catching bumblebees out of a honeysuckle bush. So you can see a really good glimpse of that really long extendable net. So after we would catch bees, we'd put them in little vials for research purposes, and again, see what species were out there and how many we were finding. This is one of me catching one out of a tree, which is quite challenging, as you can imagine, and really hurt your neck when you're staring up at a tree for so long. So most of this work for that program was focused on this special concern yellow-banded bumblebee, which is a species at risk here in Canada. And it's not only a risk in Ontario, but also here in Alberta. So you can find the species here, and it is in decline across Canada. So we will hop right into bees. You can see this beautiful collage in the background here, and this is made up of some bees that you might find across, I can't remember if it's Canada or North America, but you can see all kinds of shape and colors. They're absolutely beautiful. So bees are quite diverse, and you're going to see a lot of very cool photos of bees today that I hope you enjoy. So I'm going to get started with just a little thought brainstorming activity. So what do you think of when you think of bees? And I know you were sharing stories at the beginning, but you could put a few more thoughts in the chat. When you think of bees, what comes to mind? What are we seeing in that chat? Any good things we want to share?
Here, I can take a look for you, Tiffany. I think my favorite one is fluffy flying pandas, but there's a lot of honey pollinators, honey fruit. flowers. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful associations. When I worked with bumblebees, a lot of people would describe them as big flying teddy bears, which is a very accurate description. But thank you so much for sharing, everybody. So as I've mentioned, I've worked with bees for quite a while now, and I've interacted with a lot of people about bees and done a lot of education. And I find a lot of the time when I speak with people about bees, what comes to mind is typically the honeybee or things associated with it. So people might think of things like very large colonies when they think of bees. Bees make honey. They might think of the way honeybees nest in their honeycomb. They might think bees are quite territorial or think of swarms which happen. People even keeping hives, so less about wild bees, but how do we manage bees and having our own hives. And they might even think of things like colony collapse disorder or winter loss each year. And it's quite interesting because what most of us think of as bees or traits associated with bees aren't actually true for most of our bees. So an important distinction I want to make right off the bat here is our honeybee is actually not native. And that's not to say they aren't important for honey production or agriculture, but they didn't grow up here over time or evolve here, as we might call it. So honeybees are actually imported from Europe. So it is the European honeybee we see here. And we use them for crop pollination, agricultural pollination, honey production. But unfortunately, it's just not a great mascot for what a traditional bee is and that you would find here. So most of our native species are very unlike the honeybee, which actually is kind of unique in its own variety of ways, as you'll see as I do a comparison here. So most of our bees are actually solitary, so they don't actually have hives or colonies. It's actually one female doing a lot of work. So she will emerge, she'll mate, she'll look for a nest, she'll build a nest, she'll lay eggs, she'll collect pollen. I don't know about you, but it sounds like a whole lot of work, and she'll do that again and again and again for the few weeks that she's active. So she's got no help from anybody, and that's the true story for most of our bees, actually, where honeybees have very large colonies of sometimes 50,000 individuals or more. Interestingly, most people do associate honey with bees, which is, I guess, not. I understand why it's very common to think of that. But honeybees are actually the only type of bee that do produce honey to what we know. So right now I'm drinking tea. There is honey in here. That beautiful honey does come from honeybees. But our other bees, our traditional bees that we would recognize here in our native bees here in Alberta or Canada, don't actually make honey what we know to be as honey. They sometimes make very similar substances, but it's not true honey. So that's a unique thing that only honeybees do. Another neat thing you might or think is neat is most of our bees actually nest underground or in cavities. So this could be in logs or wood in general or in plant stems. So they don't usually build kind of cool external nests, especially with honeycomb like our honeybees do. Again, I've talked with a lot of people in the past who think bees are really aggressive or territorial, or they'll mention that kind of swarming activity that honeybees do. Swarming is not something you'll see with other bees typically. And most of our bees, again, are very quite docile, just like that video I showed you. So again, not a typical trait you will find with most of the bees you'll actually encounter outside. A lot of people talk to me about how they have hives or want to have hives or just talk about beekeeping in general. And we don't traditionally do that with a lot of our other native species. We do have a few species that we do actually manage, just like honeybees, some of our solitary bees and even some of our bumblebees, but normally that's not something we associate with most of our native bees here. Lastly, colony collapse disorder, that was talked about a lot for a while, and that's actually a phenomenon that's unique to honeybees. We don't really see that in our native species. And another thing you hear a lot about each year is the winter loss for colonies. So you'll hear a lot of die-off each year. And I think it's important to remember honeybees aren't from here, they are from Europe, which has a very different climate. And honeybees, unlike our other bees, try to sustain colonies year-round. And as you can imagine, that's really difficult to do in the winter when you don't have resources. We don't really have flowers in winter. That's why our native bees are like, no, thank you. I'll actually just hibernate instead, or some of them will actually die off before the winter happens. So our native bees are especially adapted to our climate, unlike our honeybees, since they're not from here. So that is why you see a lot of that common winter die-off each year. Getting into a little bit more diversity, here's just a nice little chart here or a graphic that shows you just some of the different bees you could encounter. And just a quick little poll here. I'm curious, how many native bee species do you think call Alberta home? If you were listening closely to that prayer at the beginning, you got a little bit of a tidbit in there. We've got quite a range of numbers. What do you think? and the honeybee is just one of them.
I'll just give it a few more seconds before I close. So I see most people have answered, but there might be a few who want to pitch their idea. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll now. All right, can you see the results, Tiffany?
I can. Okay, so we got a mixture, quite a few people guessing between 100 and 200, and a close amount, a little bit more. So the most common answer was 300 to 400, which is correct. So great work, everybody. Good listening. But that might be surprising to you. That's a lot of bees. But a lot of people, again, are thinking of just the honeybee. That's one. We have way more bees than that. So it is close to about 321-ish, I think is the actual answer. And there's still a lot of work being done in Alberta to see what species we have and how many. So which ones are rare, which ones are quite common. A fun fact that I always remember from a friend of mine, I'm sure there might be some birders in the group. That's usually more common than bee watching anyway, in my experience. But there's 2 bee species to every bird species you can think of. So there's about 10,000 birds in the world and 20,000 bees. So that's a whole lot of bees. As you can see here in the diagram and that collage earlier, bees come in all kinds of colors and shapes and even sizes, which might surprise you. So this is just a fun little graphic. The quality isn't super great, but bear with me. So it shows some diversity of bees in compared to sizes such as an almond or a bean or rice for a reference. So on the top here, our large bees you can see are typically our bumblebee queens, which you'll see in the spring and at the end of the fall, as well as carpenter bees. And then all the way on the other end of the spectrum here, we've got really, really tiny bees that sometimes even look like ants. And that's some of our sweat bees and our mining bees. So very cool. So I'm going to talk about a few different ways that we normally talk about or group bees. And one of those is what we call sociality. And really, that's just a fancy word talking about the kind of social or cooperative behavior that bees engage in. So as I mentioned already, most of our native bees are solitary. So as I described that female, she's doing all of the work by herself. She doesn't have any help from anybody. So she's solitary. She's doing her own thing. She's very independent. Bumblebees are what we call our most kind of social native bees. So like honeybees, they have large colonies, they have queens and workers working together. But again, most of our bees are solitary. So that's actually pretty rare in the bee world to be as social as that. However, if you go and read up about bees, you'll see some other fancy terms like communal or nesting aggregations. And that just means some of our solitary bees might nest close to other solitary bees, or even share like a tunnel entrance into the kind of same area that they're nesting in, but they're not really helping each other out. But this is one of the things you'll see describing different bee groups is the kind of social behavior they engage in. Another way we like to talk about bees or group them is whether they are specialist or generalists. And this refers to the kind of foraging resources they use, and that means wildflowers, or the kind of habitat that they need. So some species are very general in what they eat and where they live. And a good example of this is bumblebees. So bumblebees are out sometimes as early as, depending on where you are in Canada, this could be in March, and they might be out all the way until even October. So that's a really long time. So they can kind of eat a whole lot of different things because there's so many different flowers that are in bloom during that time. However, that's not true for most of our bees. Most of our bees are only out for a few weeks. And there's only a certain kind of flowers that might be out during those few weeks. And sometimes they might specialize on a certain flower. So that's true for many of our species here in Alberta. So for example, on the right here, we have a beautiful squash bee. And as the name might tell you, it's a specialist on the gourd family. So it pollinates things like squash very exclusively, which is quite cool. Now, if you're outside, you're looking at your garden, or maybe you're already a part of our program and you're watching your bee box, there's a lot of different pollinators or even flying insects that you'll encounter when you're outside. So how do you know if it's a bee? And I know that might seem like a simple question, but it actually is a little bit more complicated. So many of our insects look very similar. Bees and wasps are often, they're very closely related. They look very similar. Flies aren't as closely related to the other two groups, but they also look quite similar. So I want to help you tease out some characters and traits that might help you identify what you're looking at. And all three are very still cool to observe in nature, but of course we're going to be talking about bees today. So starting with wasps, wasps have this kind of unique feature, and it's not true to all wasps as almost all things in nature, but they usually have a very distinct waist. So they have their body kind of separated into two very distinct segments, kind of attached by a really small piece of body. That's something that is very common for a lot of wasps that you'll see, and sometimes it's super exaggerated. Wasps also have pretty long curved antennae. They're traditionally not very hairy either, and that's not to say they might not move pollen around flower to flower, but they just don't have the same kind of hairs our bees do. In general, wasps are definitely more aggressive than bees. A lot of the stories I hear from people when they're talking about being stung by a bee are often actually wasps. And that's totally okay that you might not know the difference, especially when you're a child, for example. And that's not to say bees don't sting. But in general, wasps are definitely a little bit angrier, and they're also predatory. So you will see wasps eating a lot of other insects, but you won't see that with bees. Our bees have a very unique ability to collect pollen and spread pollen around, and that's exactly why bees are very important pollinators. So if you are seeing something that is actively carrying pollen, like I said, other things can carry pollen around, but bees do this very well. So if you see pollen packed onto a bee or packed onto an insect, it is very likely a bee. So bees have very special hairs to collect lots of pollen, as well as even special pollen collecting structures. So on the left here, we have a beautiful bumblebee. So both bumblebees and honeybees have what we call a very special pollen basket on their hind leg. So this big orange glob here is actually pollen that she's collected from flowers so she can bring them back to her nest. So she has a special structure to really efficiently pack that pollen on so she doesn't lose it as she's flying around. So really cool trait that some bees have. On the right, you see this other bee that's just absolutely covered in pollen. So they just collect pollen very, very well, even when they don't mean to. And this things that make our bees very, very efficient pollinators. Another thing you might notice about bees, if you were looking very, very closely in the slight chance that they slow down for you, they have kinked antennae. So we have really long curved antennae of wasps. Bees have a little kink at the base. If you kind of follow the outline of that red line there, that's kind of what I mean by kinked. And as we already mentioned, bees are quite hairy and fuzzy. So what somebody said, flying panda bears, flying teddy bears, very good, accurate representation for them, especially bumblebees, for example, which are particularly fuzzy. Last, we have flies, and two really good traits that'll help you figure out if something is a fly. One is their very large eyes. So if you're looking front towards a fly, it'll be really towards the front of their face, taking up a lot of their face, almost even touching sometimes. Bees and wasps traditionally have very narrow eyes towards the side of their head. Another thing you might notice, if even noticeable at all, is their really, really short stubby antenna. So where the second arrow is here is the antenna of a fly, so much shorter than what you would see on a wasp or a bee. They also don't have a stinger, so you will see some flies act like bees, but they actually can't harm you at all. And they often hover in flight quite a bit. You can see that with some bees, but it's something that you'll see a lot happen with flies. So take a quick look. So we will do a quick quiz next. So you want to think on things like the eyes, the antenna, sometimes things like the hair. Do you see it carrying any pollen? Those are all things you want to think about as we go through 3 good examples as you try to figure out if it's a bee, a fly, or a wasp. Let's give you another second to just digest all of that. Okay, so this is our first one here. So take a good look. Think of some of those traits. Do you think this is a bee, a fly, or a wasp? And this can be quite a tricky one.
I'm just watching the answers come in. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now.
Okay, so we've got a lot of people saying bee, still quite a lot of people saying fly. These are both very valid answers. This is in fact a fly, but I will tell you it is difficult. This is much different than looking the other fly we just looked at, which you'd normally see in your house. And the reason why this is so hard to tell that it's a fly instead of a bee is because it is a bee mimic. So it actually mimics very closely to a bumblebee you can find here in Alberta that has the same yellow, black, orange banding. It's super fuzzy. So this is a good example where this fly really acts like a bee and might act like it can harm you or sting you, but it actually can't. So some of the features you would look at this to realize it is a fly instead of a bee. So at that front there, I'm going to keep moving this arrow so you can really see what I'm pointing at. So this little stub at the front, and again, you'd see this if you were looking a little bit more head on, that's their antenna. So really short and stubby versus the very long antenna of whether that would be a wasp or a bee. You'd be looking for that kink if it was a bee. So that's one good indicator it's a fly. The next best one are these really, really large eyes at the front. So that's much larger than you would see traditionally on a bee. So taking up a lot of the face, really large, really compounded. So that's not something you typically see in bees. There are exceptions with that, of course, but those are the two things I'd look at. And flies also have really, really skinny legs. We didn't talk about that as much on the prior slide, but you'll see a lot of bees have a little bit wider legs. Carrying that pollen on their legs is pretty common, but we don't see any of that here with this fly. But really good job, guys. I know that one's a tough one. How about this one? Do you think this is a bee, a fly, or a wasp? Don't let that first one discourage you.
Yeah, I got that first one wrong and I've seen this presentation before, so yeah, okay, this is great. People really like quizzes. Okay, and I'm going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1, now.
Okay, we've got a high response for wasp. That's awesome. That is correct. And wasps are pretty unique in kind of the way they look, but some of the traits you'd look at here to help you identify that it is indeed a wasp. So we've got that really long curved antenna. So if you're looking at long antenna, you might be juggling in between, is that a bee or a wasp, but definitely way too long to be a fly. Another good indicator here is it's eating some sort of larva. And if you do remember, I did mention that wasps are quite predatory, so they'll eat a lot of other insects. Bees are what you might call vegetarian. They only eat pollen and nectar for flowers, so you would not see a bee eating another insect. So that might be another indicator if you see that in the wild. And then here we've got that really distinct way, so it really kind of tapers into the middle. So that's a very waspy kind of thing. So those are the three things I would kind of tease out of this photo. So great job, guys. All right, how about this one? Do we think this is a bee, a fly, or a wasp?
I want to agree with the person in the chat who said that bee is very cute. Oh,
Definitely.
No, I just gave away what I think it is. Don't let that scare you.
Okay, Beth
Don't
got
let
the first one wrong, so. I will agree, this specimen in the photo is quite cute. It was very fun to put together this presentation and put all kinds of photos in here.
All right, I'm going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so we've got a little bit of mixture of answers, but most people are guessing it is a bee, which is true. And yes, very much a cute bee. I can definitely agree with that. So some things you might look on here. So all of this orange on the underside of the abdomen is actually packed pollen onto the bee. So this is a good example of those really special hairs that bees have to collect pollen. So that is pollen that she's holding onto. You also can see a little bit of that kinked antenna there. So that's another fun fact you can look for there. And the eyes look a little bit wider up here, but we're not seeing that really distinct large eyes that are kind of meeting in the middle that you would traditionally with like a fly, for example. The antenna are too long to be a fly. So yeah, really looking to see if a individual is carrying pollen in any way. And again, pollen just attaches to hairs, whether that be on a wasp or a fly. But if you're seeing a real excessive amount, it might be a good indicator that it is a bee. So this is a beautiful leafcutter bee. And something that's common with the family that she's in is they all carry pollen on the underside of their abdomen, so on their belly, which is quite cool because a lot of other bees carry it on their legs. So we'll talk a lot about leafcutters later in the presentation. So this is just a quick glance at some of the bee groups here, 5 of the major bee groups. It's not all of the bee groups and definitely not all of the species within it. As we mentioned, we have over 300 alone here in Alberta, but just some bees you might be familiar with. So in each of these groups, you have a beautiful diversity, and they differ in the way they might collect pollen. They might differ in their social behavior and how they nest. So very cool. So there's going to be an ID resource that will be put in the chat. So if you're looking to learn more about bee families or how to identify different bee families, because we're not going to get into that too much today, it's a really great resource from Pollinator Partnership. But let's kind of get a close-up on some of these bees, a few in these groups that we can highlight. The first one I want to talk about is the bumblebees. We've already talked a little bit about bumblebees. Bumblebees are a quite fun species, or sorry, not species, a group to talk about. You might be familiar with a few bees in this group, but since we've already talked about bumblebees, we'll kind of dive into that. So as we've already talked about, bumblebees are our most truly social native bees. So they have colonies, they're not solitary. And we also talked about how they're out for a very long period of time, so many months of the year, which is not true for most of our bees. So because of that, bumblebees are really, really important pollinators. They pollinate so many of our flowers and so much of our crops because they're out for so long in a season. You'll be out in the spring, the summer, and the fall, and you'll still be seeing bumblebees all over the place, which is great for me. That's what I love, and I'm so used to seeing outside. But bumblebees also have a unique pollen collecting structure. We did briefly talk about that. So she has a little pollen basket on her leg. Remember that photo where you have the little glob of pollen packed on? So both bumblebees and honeybees share this characteristic of being able to pack pollen onto a very special pollen basket. So consider that sort of one of her bee superpowers. She's got this really cool pollen basket that she can collect pollen for, but she also has a really other cool bee superpower that some other native bees have, but honeybees don't. And it's this very special pollination technique. So some of our flowers hold their pollen really closely, and it's really difficult to get the pollen from the flower. So certain bees, like our bumblebee, will go hold onto the flower really tightly, vibrate their wings at such a high frequency that it shakes the pollen out of the flower like salt from a salt shaker. So really, really cool technique that's required for some of our plants like tomatoes, potatoes, and even blueberries. I don't know about you, but I love blueberries, so I'm very grateful for our bees, like our bumblebees. So it's a very cool technique, and again, something that honeybees cannot perform. So this is a really great example of how some of our native bees, or our native bees in general, are very well equipped to pollinate our native plants. So for example, if you had honeybees trying to pollinate a large field of blueberries, they could get the job done simply because they have such large colonies. So we're talking, like I mentioned before, like 50,000 individuals. So they have the numbers on their side, but they wouldn't do it as efficiently as a single colony of bumblebees could do, for example, since they have that really special technique. So we actually do manage bumblebee colonies just like honeybee colonies for some of our greenhouse pollination across Canada and even North America. So really cool. Looking at our next group here, so in our green highlighted group is a lot of our cavity and tunnel nesters, which we're going to talk a lot more about today. Let's have a look at our mason bees, for example. So mason bees are really important early spring bees, so they emerge very early. So they might be one of the first bees you recognize. And because they're active really early in the spring and only out for about 4 to 6 weeks, they work really hard in that time, and they make a huge impact because they actually pollinate a lot of our fruit trees. So things like apple, almond, plum, and pear. A lot of bees that are responsible for this are our mason bees. So super important, bringing you the fruit that you love. You may have even heard of the blue mason bee or the orchard bee. That comes up quite a bit, at least in my conversations with people. And that's another one of our native bee species that's actually managed for a lot of fruit pollination because they're so good at that job. People want more of them in their area. Our bottom 3 groups make up bees like our cellophane bees, masked bees, sweat bees, and even our mining bees, but we'll focus on just one more. We'll have a look at our sweat bees here. We've already seen that some of our bees have a beautiful blue-green metallic color, and sweat bees fall into this category, so they're quite visually stunning. But sweat bees are really cool in this other thing that they do. So imagine yourself gardening out in the summer. You're just trying to plant your flowers, or maybe you're weeding, and you have these really small, what you probably might not even recognize as bees that keep landing on your hand, and you're swatting them away, and they won't leave you alone. Often this is sweat bees, and the reason why they're called sweat bees is because they're actually attracted to human sweat. So they're landing on your hands and they're lapping up your sweat and really bothering you, and they won't leave you alone. Just think of them as little companions. So it's quite interesting. I didn't know that for a long time, so I thought that was really cool when I learned that. So next time you see those landing on your hand and kind of just hanging out with you, it's a good chance it's a sweat bee. So kind of a little fun thing to help you identify them sometimes. So now we've had a little glance of kind of diversity of bees. I want to get into nesting strategies and ecologies. And this will be helpful when we think about our bee boxes later on and who's going to use these boxes and why do they use the boxes and why do some bees not use them. So we're going to look at 2 examples of ground nesting bees. So these are bees that make their nests underground. So 2 examples of this are sweat bees, who we just talked about, and digger bees. So a lot of bees will kind of actually dig right into the ground. So they'll excavate out their own tunnel. They're working really hard. Sometimes this looks like tunnels that are appearing on the actual top side of the ground, just from them building up all that dirt. So you'll see a lot of mounds of dirt around, and this digger bee example here is a good example of bees that will nest in close aggregation. So each of those tunnels might be leading down to one female's nest. And lots of other bees are doing the same thing, but they're not helping each other out. They're kind of just in the same place. On the right here, we have a beautiful graphic kind of showing what that nest looks like underground. Because as you can imagine, it's pretty hard to see those nests, but it's really cool. So a female will dig down as deep as she wants, and then she'll kind of start making these little offshoot rooms. So in each one of those rooms, she'll bring that pollen to, she'll lay an egg on it. So when the egg hatches, it has something to eat. And that bee will grow and grow over time. But you can see she's using a lot of dirt and ground here to help make these little protective doors, let's say, to each room. But she will do this again and again for the few weeks that she's active. So again, really hard workers. A few other examples of nests you might see outside. Another ground nester is our bumblebees. Bumblebees are quite very messy nesters compared to a lot of our species. So I closely align with them personally. But each of these little kind of bubble capsules you see here in this photo have bees developing in them, which is really cool and very different compared to what we see, for example, with honeybees. Just comparing, since both of them have quite larger social colonies. So yeah, each one of these is a bee developing, and then these kind of little ones in the middle here that have the tops kind of cut off, and you see a little bit of sheen, or what we call nectar pots. So bumblebees will build these. They will go forward from flowers, bring nectar back into the nectar pot so that when bees are thirsty in the colony, they don't have to leave. So pretty smart, but yeah, very different looking nest compared to what you would see with most bees. Next, we have carpenter bees, which are wood nesters. So they will make their own tunnels and logs and woods. And unfortunately, very often your shed, which is what I hear a lot from people, Tiffany, there's bees, they're in my shed, they're making all these holes. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably carpenter bees. That's just the material that they like the most. The other thing I hear a lot about, which is related to carpenter bees as well, is people will say, Tiffany, these bumblebees are flying in my face and they won't leave me alone, which is very unusual for a bumblebee. Typically, that's actually male carpenter bees. So if you have a shed that's often used by carpenter bees later in the season, you'll see male bees actually be very territorial, and they'll patrol kind of that as their spot they're watching for mates. And you'll actually see them tussle in the air. It's extremely dramatic, and they'll come and fly in your face and check you out thinking you're a threat. So that's something you'll see very commonly around these nest sites. But males of all bees, but including these carpenter bees, actually don't have stingers and can't harm you. So it's really all talk, no action. But those are 2 common things you'll see with this group of bees. The last example here is pebble bees, which are a very cool, unique group that has what I would call like a freestanding nest. So they don't nest in wood, they don't nest underground. They kind of make their own cool external nest using pebbles. So really, really neat. So let's get a look into our cavity nesters, and this is really important because this is going to relate right back to our bee box and our native bee conservation program, which we'll get into after. So this is kind of just a good glance at some of our cavity nesting bees. So we have bees like our leaf cutters, which was that really cute bee in the quiz, carder bees, masked bees, mason bees, which we talked a little bit about prior on that slide, and even small carpenter bees. So it's really cool about our cavity nesters is they typically will either make their own tunnel in whatever substrate they want. Maybe that's wood, for example, or they'll use pre-existing tunnels they already find out in nature, like beetle holes in the log. But what's particularly cool is they use a variety of materials. So on that prior slide, when we were looking at the underground nest, You see that the female's using a lot of dirt. That's how she's building her rooms. That's how she's making protective doors, let's say. These bees will use all kinds of materials. It's kind of unique to each group though. So some might use leaves or flower petals, mud, even the kind of hairs and fibers off of plant stems. It gets really particular and it's very, very neat. But it's really cool because you can find a nest from one of these bees and likely be able to tell what bee is using it without seeing the bee, just based on the material you'll see. So if you see leaves, it might be leaf cutters. If you see mud, it might be mason bees. So really, really cool group of bees. And we'll talk quite a bit more about them when we get into bee boxes. But just show you a quick glance at what some of their nests look like. So we'll focus on mason bees and leaf cutters, as those are the most likely you would see nest in your bee box. So mason bees, kind of what you can tell by their name, they work a lot with mud. So that's kind of the key resource you're going to see being utilized, whether that's out in nature or in your bee box. So in this top photo, for example, you see each of these individual rooms is sectioned off with mud. So you're looking for those kinds of things when you're trying to figure out what bee is building those nests. Leaf cutters, just like the name also, they are known to use leaves, but they'll also use flower petals. So you can see really beautiful examples here in the top right of kind of their little capsules they make around their eggs. So we have a beautiful flower petal one and a leaf one, but you'll see leaf cutters cutting out leaves in your garden and carrying that leaf into their nest, and it's quite cute and very cool to see in nature. Okay, so on the left here is just a really cool video I came across actually while I was working out here at Glenbow Ranch Provincial Park. And I had seen this leaf cutter just investigating this hole. She likely didn't make it. She might be slightly adjusting it. But you can see her checking it out. And a few days later, I came back and she actually did utilize it. And I saw leaves covering the entrance, which was quite cool. Another fun little leaf cutter video here is an example of a leaf cutter utilizing a bee box. When this loads, we'll let it buffer a little. You can see her bringing in a little section of leaf. And she'll continue to build those rooms one by one by one. She's working very hard by herself. She's chewing it up sometimes. She's making it fit just perfect. And then she'll be bringing in the pollen and laying her eggs. So that kind of little orange glop there is actually pollen in the middle. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for one individual. And again, she'll do that quite a few times in the few weeks that she's active. Very cool. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of a sense of what their life cycle's like. So we talked about bumblebees, for example, are out for many months of the year. And we also talked about how that's not true for most of our solitary bees. So we'll use mason bees here as an example. So the ones that use mud to build their nests. So we talked about how they're really important pollinators of our fruit trees. So we really appreciate all the hard work that they do for us. So they are out in the very early spring. So they'll emerge early spring. Males will emerge first and females a few days later. And this is simply because of the order the eggs are laid in each individual tunnel. They will mate, and then the female will go and look for a nest. She'll start building out the structure using that mud. She will lay her egg. She'll collect the pollen. Eggs can take anywhere from 2 to 15 days to hatch, depending on the temperature. And then the eggs will continue to develop. And depending on the species, sometimes bees will overwinter or hibernate as adults. Other times they're still developing. For mason bees, since they're out so early in the spring, they have lots of time to develop over the summer. So they'll actually overwinter as adults. And they actually spin these really cute cocoons, which cocoons are always thought to be very unique to things like butterflies and moths, but bees actually can do this too. And then those bees will emerge the next spring. So really neat. So again, only active for about 4 to 6 weeks of the year. So really small time period when you think about it. And they only have one generation per year for most of our bees. So that means those females will come out, they lay the eggs just the one time, and that's kind of it for the whole season. Whereas sometimes other pollinators like our butterflies will have several generations throughout the summer. So a little bit different for our bees. Okay, so we've learned a little bit about more bees, background in cavity nesting bees, a little bit how bees nest and use different resources to build their nests. So let's get into the native bee conservation program, which I'm really excited to talk about, especially since we're releasing our bee kits this week. So I've been working on this for months and thinking about it. So I'm super excited, and I hope you are too. So a little bit about the program, as Beth talked a little bit about it in the beginning, but I'll just expand a bit more. So this program began in 2022, so this is our third year running. And it is a great opportunity to engage Métis citizens with bees, conservation, monitoring, and just connecting people back with the land, outdoors, pollinators. And it really has the intention of supporting our native bees, who we know are very important pollinators, as about, unfortunately, 20% of them are at risk here in Alberta, and that figure is even a bit larger if you're looking across Canada or North America. On the right here, there is a pie graph from our Alberta Native Bee Council, who does lots of great beat work, and they are working really hard to figure out what kind of species we still have in Alberta by doing monitoring, similar to like what I was doing before. But you'll see here, there's a few categories that relate to bees being at risk. So again, about 20% are thought to be at risk. But what's even more alarming in some ways is there's about a quarter of our species who are what we call unrankable. And this means we just don't have enough information to say whether they are at risk or they're doing fine. And sometimes that's because they're too rare already that we just don't find enough individuals. Other times that means they were already rare and we just didn't know because nobody was really monitoring. So it's a bit concerning that we just don't know the status of some of these bees, but people are working on it, I assure you. I'm sure you are wondering what are some of the threats. We talked about at the beginning that, you know, our native bees might not be experiencing colony collapse disorder, but they do have other threats. And I don't want to worry you. Not all of our bees are dying or going extinct. That's not true by any means. But there are a lot of threats that are happening and they affect our bees in different ways. So 4 of the major threats I usually talk about are habitat loss. And that's both loss of nesting habitat, but also foraging habitat. So habitat where bees used to access flowers. So they might have to fly even further for flowers now because of development or agriculture, for example, maybe. Or maybe they're just not finding a lot of undisturbed places to nest safely. Another important one is climate change. You probably know all about the different ways climate change affects even just us as humans, but climate change affects people quite a bit as well. So a good example of how this might interact with our pollinators and especially our bees is lately we've been getting a lot of earlier spring sometimes and it heats up really quick. That tells bees to come out and it's ready to go, but there's actually no resources ready yet. So there's kind of a mismatch of when bees are emerging and when flowers are actually in bloom. So that's really confusing for bees. As you can imagine, they come out thinking it's nice in spring, but there's actually nothing to eat. So that's something that's happening very, very commonly now, unfortunately. Another one you've probably heard lots about is pesticides. So there is a lot of research that researchers are doing looking into how pesticides affects bees. So that's been a hot topic for several years now. One you probably haven't heard as much about, though, is pathogens and disease. And this is definitely a growing threat. So just like us, unfortunately, bees can get sick. And they can get sick from other bees who are foraging on the same flowers as them. And because we actually manage colonies of bumblebees and honeybees, where usually those pathogens and disease are a little bit more common, while they're out foraging, they can pass that on to our wild native bees, which is a big problem. So a lot of research is being done around that kind of stuff as well. So we look at a lot of research, we read a lot of numbers, but I'm just curious, in your own personal experience, what have you noticed about bee populations over time? What have you been seeing? There's no right answer to this, of course. Whatever you've been seeing, and I know we're all from different parts of Alberta here, so it could be different in very different areas, so very interesting.
All right, most people have responded. So I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, we've got a diversity of answers. We've got most people saying there are less bees is what they've noticed. Some people seeing no change, some people don't know. That's perfectly all fine. Some people saying there are more bees. As I mentioned, some bees are doing perfectly fine and are actually increasing, so that's also completely valid. So we all could be experiencing very different things depending on where we live. So just, yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's really interesting to see what people have experienced in their time. Okay. So a little bit more into the program. So we've got the background. Now, how does this actually work? So there will be a draw that Métis citizens can register in to win a bee kit. Winners will be contacted and kits will be shipped out in April this year. So even if you win one of the 5 tonight, your kit still won't ship till the rest of the kits ship with everybody else who is registering. For those who are selected and have the kit shipped out to them, citizens will then install the bee nesting box on their property and will plant wildflower seeds. And again, they might not they might not bloom in the first year, but that's okay. Then citizens will monitor bee activity both in the flowers they plant and the nesting box over the season, see who's visiting, is anybody using the box. Citizens will then report back on the native bee activity in their area through an online form. And if you're part of any of our other ECC projects, this will be quite familiar to you, no stranger to that. And then citizens will use the box again in the following year and conduct maintenance, and we'll talk a lot about that more, but just making sure that their boxes are clean and healthy for bees to continue to nest in. So on the right there is just kind of an example of all the things you will likely receive in a kit this year. So there has been quite a high interest in the program, which we're super happy to hear, and lots of people even just here to learn tonight, which is great. So we've had about 750 bee boxes out. So you can see kind of them scattered across the province there on the right with our story map. So we'll drop a link in the chat for you to go check that out. You can learn about other parts of the program and bees as well. But we've had over 1,500 registrations for the 750 that have gone out. So super high interest. We're really happy to offer this program again this year. So another 250 will go out. The registration will open this Saturday, which is super, super exciting, and will run to the following Friday, so February 16th. So just a reminder, you need to be a Métis citizen to be eligible and not already have had a box through the program. And a reminder again, Beth mentioned this at the beginning, if you fill out the little survey that will come up after the Zoom session, you will have a chance to win 1 of 5. So it gives you a high chance to win one before the registration even opens for the kits on Saturday. So if you do happen to be a selected person to win a kit after this session, please don't register again on Saturday and leave chances for everybody else. So you'll definitely be contacted before then. So also just curious, who already has received a native bee conservation kit from this program?
Ooh, judging by the results, I think we're going to get a lot of applications on Saturday. All right, I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, very interesting. So most people here, an overwhelming almost 90% don't. I really appreciate you still being here and willing to learn and curious about the program and native bees. So thank you for joining us tonight. And for the small amount of you that already has a kit, I'm really happy you're still participating in the program and enjoying it. Okay, we'll keep going. So we're gonna kind of touch base on what are bee boxes or bee hotels. You might also recognize that term, and get into a little bit more who's going to use them, what are they like. So bee boxes are man-made structures built to mimic natural nesting habitat. So they're mimicking things like plant stems, beetle tunnels, and these are for our cavity nesters, if you remember. So they're not for our underground nesters. They do have some wood components, but they're really for our cavity tunnel nesters. So we saw a few of those, like our leaf cutters and our mason bees. Those are the ones that we're really targeting with this program. So just to be real clear, you're not going to see things like bumblebees or honeybees in these boxes. They might be checking them out, but remember these both have quite large colonies. So again, honeybees into the thousands, bumblebees into the hundreds. There's simply not enough space. And bumblebees nest underground, so they're not going to be using a box like this. Honeybees make their own nest, so you won't be seeing these utilize your nest boxes. And what that means, you will not be able to harvest honey from here. Unfortunately, if that's what you're looking for, then a bee box is not really what should be on your radar, but you will still hopefully see lots of other cool bees utilize your box. So why do people use bee boxes? Well, one, people want to attract bees to their landscape through other means other than flowers. They also use them to increase nesting opportunity for our cavity nesting bees. We talked about habitat loss is a problem. We're losing safe areas for bees to nest in. So by you putting up a bee box might help provide a few more options for bees to safely create their nests in. So it kind of increases the opportunities available to them, especially if you're in a well-developed area. Another thing that they're often used for is just simply an educational and learning tool. So they're really fun. A lot of the feedback we get through citizens in our program is that it's a really family fun activity. They like going out with their kids and checking the boxes each day. They put them up with their kids. So it's just a really fun activity to help you learn more about bees. And they're even used in research to study nesting ecology. So when do bees emerge and things like that? So sometimes they're used as a tool in research. So how do these boxes actually mimic natural nesting habitat? So for example, the boxes that go out this year, as they did last year, have two kind of components. One is paper straws, and then one is blocks of wood with holes drilled into it. So these drill blocks are kind of to simulate things like logs. So remember that video I showed you of that leaf cutter bee checking out that log? This is what that log looked like a few days later. So you can see the leaf at the front there. So this is something that'll appeal to our cavity nesters, but even maybe our carpenter bees that like to use wood as their nesting substrate. And our paper straws that are inserted in there will mimic more things like our plant stems. Again, some bees will kind of carve out stems. So on the right here is what we'd call a pithy stem. So it's really soft inside and really easy for the bees to kind of scrape out. Other stems are hollow and they can simply use it as is, but that's what we're trying to mimic with our paper straws. So that's how bee nests look in nature. If you're looking at your bee box, seeing that it's being utilized as a nest might look something like this. So we've got a few examples of mason bees using it. So remember, they like to use mud. So you might see your paper tubes filled with mud at the front, or you can see the mud kind of at the end of that drill block, showing you that mud's kind of capping off the entrance. So it's been utilized already. So there's lots of eggs in there, hopefully. When you think of bee boxes, or if you look them up, you'll see there is tons of different designs that you'll see. So things like a bundle of tubes, those drill blocks and tubes. This third one is a cool example of where you have like little trays you can pull out, and that's how you can see, for example, like on this left slide here, you can see each individual tunnel quite easily. So there's all kinds of designs which are quite cool. So what makes a good bee box? And I want to be very clear and just put a disclaimer here. So we know not everybody can register for a bee kit, and that everybody who does, unfortunately, can't receive one. So if you are interested enough that you want to build your own or seek it out, please consider the criteria that we're going to go over here. Bee boxes, when not built properly or not used properly, can do more harm than good. So if you're going to take the task on of doing this, again, please just make sure you're trying to build it to the best of your ability to follow the criteria we're going to go through, because we don't want to harm our bees in any way. They're already in decline, some of them. So we only want to do the best we can to support them. So here is sort of a checklist to kind of go through if you're considering something like that. So the first one is appropriate tunnel depth. So that's what I mean by that is how long are those paper straws? How long is that tunnel in the drill blocks? And this is really important simply because more space means more eggs, of course. The longer the tunnel, the more eggs that female can lay, which is great. That means more bees. But it's also really important for the sex ratio. So to demonstrate that, say we have, this is one of those kind of pull-out trays from a bee box. You can see a mason bee is building a real beautiful nest here. So the female who's laying the eggs, she will lay all of her females at the back. She really wants to protect those females. She wants them to be as far away from the entrance as possible because females are really important. You know, they're carrying on the next generation. So females will be laid at the back, which is also why they emerge last. Males will be laid towards the front, which is why they emerge first. So they will be, males in this case are a bit more expendable, so she's willing to put more of those at the front of the nest. And a lot of our native solitary bees are really smart and will actually put an empty room at the front. So say a bird breaks into this nest and is trying to eat up all that larva. She breaks into that first room, she sees it's empty, she thinks she's wasted her time and she's not even going to bother anymore, when in fact the bee was smart enough to put kind of a little decoy room at the beginning, and all of her bees are going to be safe in the back. So really kind of cool. But say that this little tunnel that's showing here was half the size. Maybe she could only lay one female versus 4. She can lay less bees overall. So it's really important that the tunnel depth is at least 6 inches, ideally more, to really accommodate for that proper sex ratio. Another good thing you want, if you can, to include is a variety of diameter sizes. If you're focusing on one particular species, there's certain research that will tell you kind of what diameter to focus on. But if you're just like, I want to help all bees, which is great. As we saw in that one graphic way at the beginning, some bees are close to like the size of a grain of rice versus an almond. So in order to accommodate for as many bees as possible, you want as many different sized holes in your drill blocks and different sized paper tubes, for example, in your box. So more sizes cater to more bees. And usually we focus on about 5 to 10 millimeters. That usually accommodates most of our mason bees and leafcutter bees, which are found frequently to use bee boxes, but you can do anywhere from 1 to 10 millimeters. Ideally, you want to use more natural materials, so things like untreated woods, reeds, even old stems from your yard, which we'll talk about in a bit, and paper. Usually you want to stray away from materials that are plastic, glass, or metal, both for ventilation reasons and kind of thermal regulation reasons. They might get too hot or too cold. You want your box to be durable. You want it to withstand weather and potential predation. So we have seen even some of our citizens build an extra roof over their box to help with weather, or they've even put, I think it's called chicken wire, on the front of their boxes to help make sure birds aren't breaking into there. So those are some things you might want to consider. And then another very important part, which I've already touched on, the box needs to be cleaned. So we already talked about how bees can get sick. So if you leave your box out without cleaning it, a lot of pathogens and disease can spread in there, and you don't want to be in a hotel that's dirty and would make you sick. So we want our bees to have a very safe, healthy, happy home. So it's really important that each year you are maintaining and cleaning your box to prevent this. So now we'll look into kind of a step-by-step how the program works. I went over it kind of briefly and how it works, but a little bit more detail into each step. So say you are one of our selected people from the draw, you get shipped your kit. Your first thing is going to be to probably install your box. So when do you do that? Ideally, as soon as you get your box. We are shipping out our boxes, hopefully beginning of April this year. So this is a little bit earlier than we have in prior years, simply because them going out later meant we were missing some of our early emerging bees, like our mason bees. Remember, they emerge really early in the spring, pollinating our fruit trees. But say you get your box by May, which is hopefully when you would be getting it, but you're too busy and you can't install it till June or July, it's still okay. You can still put it up whenever works for you. We still have bees who emerge a little bit later in the season, like our leaf cutters. So you might miss the mason bees if you don't do it in the spring, but you still might be able to accommodate and provide a nesting place for some of our other bees later in the year. Where should you put your box? Anywhere that's really close to flowers, within 100 meters is ideal, which is about the size of a football field, which is quite far still if you think about it. 100 meters is used because that's how far most bees will actually fly to flowers to forage. And if you have any other resources you want them to be nearby, you might want to consider that. So for example, we talked about mason bees like to use mud to build their houses. So if you have any exposed area of sand or mud, that might be somewhere you might want to consider putting your box as well. So they don't have to travel as far to bring that to your box to build their beautiful nest. How should you install it? Ideally, you want it off the ground, both for weather and predation reasons. We see people secure it to trees, to fences, to posts, to the side of their garage. There's lots of different options. Research will tell you to ideally place it so that the entrance is facing south-southeast for sunlight purposes, and ideally somewhere that can be a little bit shielded from weather. But as you can see, some people do install that little extra roof just in case for protection. Fun fact that I forgot to mention as we were going through this section, if you have filled out the feedback form in the last 2 years for this program, which one, thank you very much, but two, all of these photos for the most part in this section are from citizens. So you might see your photo in there. So you can put it in the chat if one of your photos has been featured. So you've installed your box. The next thing would be to plant flowers. So there'll be 8 flowers that go out this year. And this is from Blazing Star, which is a company in Saskatchewan. So in the blue box, you'll see some of the flowers you'll get, like black-eyed Susan, wild bergamot, purple prairie clover. And each of these seed packets will have information for each individual flower you're getting on kind of when you should be planting it, the germination time, things like that. But you can seed in spring, early summer, or the late fall before the temperature cools off. Ideally, you're wanting to plant in sunny locations that you don't use pesticides on, and there's probably already weed-free so the weeds don't take over, and somewhere that is going to be well watered by rain or very easily accessible for you to water yourself. So this is what the little seed packets look like. They'll tell you what flower it is on the top, some planting instructions, germination times, things like that. So yeah, just a reminder, the ones in the blue box, the ones that you'll be receiving, are catered specifically to pollinators and bees. So those are all good things you can have in your garden already, or that you might be interested in planting if you don't receive a seed packet this year. But some other plants that are recommended, for example, by the Alberta Native Bee Council. So remember, they're the ones who are trying to figure out what bees we have here in the province. So some of the ones they suggest are things like harebell, Saskatoon, beard tongue, nodding onion, cut-leaved anemone, and bearberry. So we'll put a link in a chat for one of the resources they have on their website, which gives you a couple different examples of bees that are great, or flowers that are great for our wild bees. And on that same sheet, it will actually show you which of these plants have hollow stems, which is great, again, for our cavity nesters who like to use those hollow or pithy plant stems. Okay, so you've put up your box, you planted your flowers, which again might not bloom that year, and that's okay. Now's the fun part, which is monitoring. So at a safe distance, you're going to want to watch your box and your flowers, see who's visiting. Like in this flower, they might come and check out your box. Maybe they don't use it, but it's still really cool to see. And then you want to look for signs of use. So you want to look for those tunnels being capped off by one of those materials or those resources. So we see mud in the paper tubes here. That's a good indicator. This might be a mason bee, which is really neat. Maybe you see leaves as one of those materials at the entrance. So that's a good indicator. It might be leaf cutter bees. Another thing you want to look for, and I think I mentioned this earlier on, is very kind of perfect circles being cut out of leaves in your garden. So you might not see these leaf cutters maybe looking at your box or even building the nest, but you might see evidence that they've been there because they will cut those really nice circles out of your leaves. And maybe you didn't know that these are from these bees, but really cool. It's almost like finding tracks of animals that you don't physically see, but you know they've been around. And you might see that in your flower petals as well. So very cool. Again, you want to be looking at bees using your flowers. Maybe you'll figure out which flowers they really like in your garden. And you can take really cool photos and submit these in your feedback survey to us. And you can also submit them to our new iNaturalist project. So this year we're incorporating this new into the project, and you'll receive a whole guide on how to use this platform. But if you're already taking pictures of bees using your box and in your garden, maybe you want to contribute them to something a little bit further with a bit of a bigger purpose. So just curious how familiar you are with the platform iNaturalist. Do you know what it is? Are you using it? Because it is a really cool platform if you're not aware of it.
Okay, we have a good number of responses, so I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so we got a variety of answers. A lot of people who aren't aware of it, some who know of it but don't use it, some who use it and do know of it, so that's great. That's totally okay. We'll teach you a little bit about it. And if you participate in this program this year, by no means are you obligated to do this. It's just if you want to put those photos somewhere that you love, or you want to see who's in your garden and using those flowers, because what the platform is where users like yourself can upload photos, or fun fact, even calls. So if you're interested in birds, for example, you can upload bird calls to this. And you can upload photos of actually anything, whether it be flowers, birds, mammals, or bees. So this is where you could upload photos of bees using your box or your wildflowers. And other users on the platform, or M&A staff such as myself, for example, can go in and look at your photos and tell you, oh, that's this bumblebee, or this is this bee. So it's really cool. You get to build your identification skills and see what you have. Because that's not really quite of the process of, you might submit photos to us in your feedback form, but we don't really go back and be like, oh, that's really cool, it's this particular bee. So that's another fun component on your end. And by you uploading and sharing your photos, you're contributing to this really cool big database that's often used for research and really helps people track and monitor species across North America. So you can put in any species you want in there. You could put, say you put a particular plant you want to look at, or a family of plants. You can put in Alberta or Canada and browse through all kinds of observations. It's a really, really cool platform. So we'll drop a link to that in the chat for you to check out on your free time. Okay, so you've put up your box, you planted your flowers, you've watched them over the season. Now it's time for you to report back. So that will be the next step in the process. You'll be emailed a link for a form to fill in, telling us kind of what you saw over the season. So we'll ask you things like, did bees use your box? Did bees visit your flowers? Did you enjoy participating in the program? These are all things we want to know, and it's really important for us to continue shaping the program in the future and making sure it's fitting your needs. So what we've heard from citizens over the last 2 years are bees are using the flowers. That's great. We're seeing bees using the nest boxes, which is great. And keep in mind, sometimes bees aren't or boxes might not be always successful in your first year, but they actually increase in success over time. So once boxes have been out longer and they're more weathered, bees are more likely to use it. So if they don't use it in your first year, don't be discouraged. I promise you there is still hope, but we have seen good success so far, which is great. We're hearing that citizens are enjoying the program, so this is super important to us as well, and why we keep offering it. And we're seeing that people want to participate in more than 1 year, which is really cool. So they've done all the work in 1 year and they're like, this is so great, I want to do it again. So we're really happy to hear things like that. So this year, one of the things we asked in the survey was, what was your favorite part of the program? And I got to read through a lot of these responses, and they were really wholesome and heartwarming. So I just want to share a few with you. So one person said their favorite part of the program was realizing how beautiful watching nature can be. Somebody else said, I love that my children are learning about nature and life cycles. So again, a very family fun activity. Another person said, a feeling of participating in something that matters. So we love hearing feedback like this. Again, I felt it was really heartwarming to see this kind of feedback. And again, this kind of feedback is what pushes us to offer this program again, which is again why we're so happy to offer another 250 to go out this year. So after you've reported back, the next thing that's going to be on your radar is maintenance. So we've talked a lot about how it's really important to keep these bee boxes clean, making sure our bees are healthy, we're making sure they're not getting sick. So boxes will need to be cleaned after your bees emerge in the following year. So say in the summer, you have a bunch of those tubes that are capped, you then leave your box out, or you can bring it into an unheated area. Say you bring it in, you'll put it back out in the very early spring, wait for those bees to emerge, and then you would clean out those sections as needed. Of course, you can't clean the box while bees are in it, so you have to wait till they emerge. So you'll see those tunnels that used to be capped will be open, and those bees will be out and about, which is super cool. And there'll be a whole maintenance guide that goes with the kits telling you how to do this in more detail. And we're also hoping to record a video this year on how to do that. So stay tuned for that. But for example, say you have these drill blocks, you want to clean out the tunnels using something like a straw brush or a pipe cleaner or even compressed air. And then you want to sanitize the blocks or roast the blocks in the oven. If you have paper tubes, you'll simply dispose of the ones that are used, so you can recycle those and then replace them with new tubes. And in the guide, we'll show you a few different places you can buy paper tubes of different diameters, but you can also use pithier hollow plant stems, as we've referenced a few times throughout this presentation. So you could use things you already have in your yard, which is super great. So here are some plant stems that are suitable for our cavity nesting bees, and we'll put a link in the description from the Xerces organization. So they do a lot of pollinator conservation work, and they have a really great kind of informational pamphlet on how to create habitat for our native bees. And it includes some of the plants that have hollow and pithy plant stems. But some of the ones you might already have and you can use in your bee box, or simply just cut back and use as extra habitat in addition to your bee box, are things like raspberries, brambles, bergamot or bee balm, sunflower, coneflower, thistle. These are all things you might already have around, and you could simply use those instead of paper stems on the next year of your bee box when you're trying to replace out some of those pieces. So really cool and a really sustainable way, of course. So you don't have to cut those back and throw them away. You can actually make really good use of them and provide homes in a much more even natural way. So that is all from me today. I hope you have enjoyed everything. It's been super great sitting and chatting with everybody. And again, real great honor for me to be here talking about something I'm so passionate about. Pollinators, including our bees, as we know, are super important and play such an integral role in our landscapes. So bees are very much connected to the land. So when you connect with bees, you connect with the land. And thank you so much. And I'm sure there's lots of questions I see pouring in, so we'll get into that.
Yeah, there are so many questions. We don't have a lot of time, and there was so many incredible questions. So we're going to answer a couple here in the call and sign off at 7:40 just to respect people's time. And you have other things to do tonight. Although it's great to just talk about bees all night. We will be sending a follow-up email with the link to this recording, and we can answer more of the questions and really give you some in-depth responses. So for now, I'm going to ask a couple that maybe several people have asked and have not been answered yet in the presentation. I'm going to start with this question from Brandy. How do I create a spot for the solitary bees to ground nest? And maybe anything else about protecting ground nesting bees specifically?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think one of the easiest ways is just having exposed sand that's not very disturbed. A lot of people, when they see a lot of empty space, they want to use it for something, but really some of the best ways to help our bees is actually just leaving nature as it is, which is also an excellent reason to not rake your leaves in the fall, for example. A lot of bees use that to overwinter. So just kind of leaving that bare soil available for them, making sure it's not disturbed. They'll do the rest of the work themselves. Otherwise, for ground nesters, I've come across a lot of colonies of even bumblebees in the ground, and I've been very close, and it's been pretty safe. They don't quite bug me, but if I do find a nest on my property, sometimes I will flag it out to the rest of my family members, for example, so they're just being careful around being around that area. But again, with many of our bees being so docile, even being fairly close to the nest, not that I recommend it, it's still usually not a huge concern. So if you happen to find a nest, just be at a safe distance, but otherwise just keeping that little bit of undisturbed, bare soil available for them. A lot of bees will like doing that, especially if you have any soil that's kind of on an incline, little bit of a hill. They particularly like that.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I hope that answered your question. Another question, we had a few asking about what time of year is best to clean the box, or specifically for mason bee boxes, when to clean it.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I know there's a lot of confusion here because it depends sometimes on what bees are using it. So a lot of people might think into winter, you might clean it and set it out next year. But in the winter is when you'd actually have those bee eggs developing in the box. So you don't want to clean it out because the bees are actually still in there trying to develop. So say you do have mason bees nesting in there, or you have something that's catered to mason bees. Again, they should emerge very early spring. So you leave the box outside, or again, you can take it to an unheated area. You don't want to bring it somewhere heated because it might affect the development. But you'd either leave it out or put it back out in very early spring when bees start to emerge. So like our mason bees, you'll see those tunnels kind of break open. Those males will exit first. Remember, they're laid towards the front, then females after them. Once you see that all of those tunnels are no longer capped, that's when you can go and clean out that drill block, or replace the paper tubes. So you're waiting till the bees in there have actually emerged. Some of our bees, again, might come out much, much later. So if they were leaf cutters, some of that work might be done more in the summer. So it's a bit difficult sometimes if you have different bees nesting in the wood block, but that's why the paper tubes can be super handy, because you can take out one individual one at a time as they emerge and replace them as you go.
Awesome, thank you, Tiffany. We also have a question that I'm going to quickly respond to because I think there's a lot of people in this call, if they are not M&A citizens, or if you are a citizen and you apply for a bee kit and you weren't able to get it because you have too many applications. We had a question asking where to buy or build their own bee box. And there's a ton of good resources online. I think Tiffany equipped you with some really good info about what to look for and what makes a good bee box. You can always refer back to this video if you need a refresher when you're looking for your own. We, as the M&A, we source our boxes from the Edmonton Area Land Trust. So that's a good place to start, and they have good tutorials and information about native bees too, and it's a local resource. So yeah, I would direct you over there if you are not able to get a bee kit through us.
And they have different size boxes too. I think they've got small, medium, and large. So whatever caters to you, they've got a few different kinds.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Wow, this is good, Tiffany. You're so efficient. We can answer more questions. I'm going to, one person, Dawn, asked if they can swap out their mason bee nesting trays in the bee house and put in trays for leaf cutters, or should they each have their own house?
They can definitely nest in the same space. So you could have mason bees and leaf cutters in the same bee box, even in the same tray. So that's not a problem. The only thing that might be slightly different is if, and I can't remember the exact numbers in my brain right now, but this is something we could follow up in email. I think mason bees are bigger than leaf cutters, could be the reverse. But say 5 millimeters is what you want for leaf cutters. Mason bees might be 8 millimeters. So if all of your holes are on that smaller size, you might not be able to get leaf cutters in there because they simply can't really fit in there. So that might be your only issue if you've got that kind of same diameter across your tray. But if you have a few different diversity sizes in each tray, or on the tray above, maybe it's a bit bigger and you've got diversity across each individual tray is a different size. That might be a better approach, but certainly they can still nest in the same space. That's no issue. You don't need a whole separate box for mason bees and a whole separate box for leaf cutters. They're still friends. They can hang out.
They're still friends. Lovely. Okay. one question from Craig Shaw. Thanks, Craig. Are there bee cams?
That's a good question. In my experience, no, not outside of research usually. I have worked with people on research projects who were doing boxes for bumblebees, which are quite a bit different, and we were monitoring them with cool scope cameras, which is quite neat to see if they were being used. But that is the only time I've really ever seen cameras be used. Although you might have seen this online here from time to time, some people will actually get those little doorbell camera alerts of a bumblebee flying by up close, which are super cute. If you have not seen that, I urge you to Google it because it's fantastic. But I'm sure they would still be picked up if they're picked up by cameras like that, but haven't really heard of that too often. But if you do that, please send me photos because I bet they would be incredible.
Yeah, if you set up a tiny bee cam in your kit, please submit them to us. We would love to watch that.
Yeah, that'd be very, very cool. It would be a cool time lapse for sure. I guess I have seen people do time lapses of when they do have a bee that's building a colony. They might sit and set up a camera, but it's not like in the same way like a trail camera might be left out. But there are cool time lapses out on YouTube you could check out.
Awesome, thanks. I hope you all leave this call and Google bee time-lapse videos. There's a lot of questions here. Here's one interesting one that we would love to get your answer to this, Tiffany. Julia asked, I've heard many people say that you should remove the cocoons before the winter and keep them in the fridge. I've never done this, but I heard it's recommended to prevent a mite infestation.
Yeah, so this is something that's not currently in the guide and not in the presentation, as you are aware, but definitely something people who want to go the extra step have done. And if I had my own cool bee kit, unfortunately, I do live in a condo and just don't really have the space. This is something I would do. So there aren't currently resources I have on guard to send out, but if you follow up through email, I can certainly send you resources. But a lot of people will actually open up those individual tunnels or pull out the trays and they'll take out those little spin cocoons. And yeah, you can clean them up and you can sort them. So you can sort all your mason bees with your mason bees and leaf cutters. And sometimes you will notice this, other species are going to use your box. You'll see even wasps will get in there, spiders. So it helps kind of sort out those things from there as well. As some wasps actually parasitize some of our bee cocoons, which is not good. So this is actually a good way to prevent that as well as other infestations. So a lot of people will do that. They'll keep them in the fridge over the winter at very particular temperatures, and then they will put them back out in the bee box. And typically, if you put them back out in a bee box, they are more likely to go back to the bee box. So certainly I can provide resources for that. Definitely don't have time to get into that today, but a lot of people who actually house mason bees and leaf cutters, especially for their own kind of pollination purposes, will usually do that kind of step. So, which is really cool and get you a little bit more involved and it's kind of fun. So I'd be happy to send some resources for that.
Awesome. Maybe we'll just squeeze in one little bit for people who are still here, who still just want to hear as much as they can about bees. It's a big one, but how do our recent hot summers affect the bees here, or a combination of our dry summers and winters with low precipitation?
Ooh, interesting. I could focus more on the heat. As I talked about in the beginning, I am from Ontario, which is surely much more humid than Alberta. So I don't have as much experience with kind of the humidity aspect, but heat is definitely a factor. So one of the things you'll definitely see is when we have more of those drought conditions, our flowers don't do very well either. Some flowers can do pretty well in dry conditions, but others don't. So you'll see a lot less flowers throughout later in the summer, or you'll actually see invasives, for example, who do really well in kind of all kinds of conditions. So pollinators might have to focus on invasive plants, but which don't always provide very good nutritional pollen and nectar. So maybe they don't have access to native flowers. A lot of our bees, and again, most of my knowledge is with bumblebees, do have kind of a thermal threshold just like we do. They don't really want to be out when it's 30 degrees. So you'll see activity drop quite a bit when it gets very hot. So when I used to do monitoring surveys, once it got to that peak time in the afternoon, you'd see a lot less bees out because it's really hot. And although they can sort of thermal regulate a little bit, it's quite difficult for them to do all that pollen collecting work, as you can imagine. Imagine you running to each of these flowers back and forth to your nest. It would be pretty tiring in 30 degrees. So it is definitely affecting colonies for sure, but also affecting our plants, which has that domino effect on our pollinators.
Awesome, thanks so much. Okay, we're going to wrap it up there because we could just continue all night with the questions we have. We've tried our best to respond to some of the questions in the Q&A, like type out some responses. But if you have a question and it didn't get answered, we're going to try and cover all of them in the follow-up email. So don't worry, we'll get there. And if you have burning questions, more specific questions to ask that weren't covered in this, feel free to email us at environment@métis.org. We can also respond to you there. Yeah, this was an incredible turnout tonight. Thank you all so much for coming. Thanks for being here, learning about bees, participating in our program, generally just being incredible people and helping the bees. Thank you, Tiffany, too, for bringing all your incredible knowledge, for your expertise and your enthusiasm about bees. It's just wonderful. I think you convinced, if we were not convinced already that we love bees and you entered this call today, I think you would have to be at this point. So I'm going to wrap it up now. Thanks everyone so much, and I hope you have a good night. And remember to fill out that survey if you're an M&A citizen.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Excuse me, where is the survey?
Oh, as you click to leave the Zoom chat, it'll pop up for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Good luck, everybody, both in tonight and for the registration on Saturday.